Readers are welcome to leave comments in the comments section.
The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside the only sanctuary I had left in this city. I didn't even have time to drop my keys before a familiar scent of cold bergamot and expensive leather filled the narrow hallway. That distinct perfume belonged to only one person in my entire world. Chloe stood in the center of my dimly lit living room, her tailored white silk suit catching the golden afternoon light. She was tracing the rim of my favorite coffee mug with a perfectly manicured finger. I froze entirely, my heart slamming violently against my ribs in a chaotic mixture of fury and sudden panic. We had spent the last 5 exhaustive years tearing each other apart in corporate boardrooms and aggressive pitch meetings. She was the untouchable ice queen of the agency, and I was the relentless firebrand who constantly challenged her throne. Now, she was casually trespassing in the middle of my private home. "Get out," I demanded, though I hated how my voice betrayed a slight, betraying tremor. Chloe didn't flinch at my sudden hostility. She simply turned her head toward me, letting a slow, incredibly predatory smile curve her painted lips. "You haven't checked your personal email today, have you?" she asked, her voice dropping into a low, smooth purr. I tightened my death grip on my leather handbag, refusing to give her the satisfaction of looking away. "My landlord's business has absolutely nothing to do with you," I shot back fiercely. She took one slow step toward me, the sharp click of her designer heels echoing ominously on the hardwood floor. "Your former landlord," she corrected gently. Those 3 words hit my chest like a physical, suffocating blow. She pulled a folded piece of heavy, watermarked parchment from her blazer pocket and tossed it onto the glass coffee table. "I bought the entire building this morning." The oxygen in the room suddenly vanished, leaving me gasping in thin air. My apartment was the one tiny corner of the universe I owned that was entirely untouched by our toxic rivalry. Now she literally held the legal deed to my safety and my peace of mind. "Why?" I whispered, utterly hating how vulnerable and small I sounded in that moment. Chloe methodically closed the distance between us, her dark gaze dropping briefly to my lips before locking fiercely onto my eyes. "Because I always win," she murmured effortlessly. I backed away instinctively, seeking space, but my legs abruptly hit the hard edge of my mattress. I hadn't even realized she had expertly backed me all the way into the open doorway of my bedroom. Before I could pivot or escape, she moved with terrifying, blinding speed. Her hands planted firmly on the mattress on either side of my hips. I lost my balance and fell backward onto the soft duvet with an involuntary, sharp gasp. Chloe instantly hovered over me, her delicate silver necklace dangling just inches from my trembling collarbone. The intoxicating scent of bergamot was overwhelmingly close now, clouding my usually sharp judgment. I could feel the dangerous heat radiating from her athletic body. Every logical instinct screaming in my brain told me to push her away immediately. Yet, my hands remained inexplicably frozen at my sides, gripping the bedsheets in quiet desperation. Her dark, bottomless eyes searched my face slowly, stripping away my usual armored bravado. "You owe 6 months of back rent," she stated softly into the quiet room. My cheeks burned fiercely with the supreme humiliation of my secret financial ruin being laid bare before my worst enemy. "I will pay you every single cent," I gritted out, staring defiantly up into her smug eyes. She leaned in even closer, until I could feel her warm breath ghosting tantalizingly over my jawline. "Oh, I know you will," she whispered against my skin. She shifted her weight forward, one knee pressing deeply into the mattress right between my legs. A sudden, dangerous shiver ran violently down my spine at the intimate contact. "But I don't want your useless money." The bitter tension in the room abruptly snapped into something entirely new and terrifyingly electric. She wasn't looking down at me like a hated corporate rival anymore. She was looking at me like I was the ultimate prize she had been relentlessly hunting for years. "Then what exactly do you want?" I managed to ask, my throat completely dry and aching. Chloe's thumb reached out and lightly brushed against the frantic pulse fluttering at my neck. "Now, you have to pay me back in my preferred currency," she declared softly. The ambient noise of the heavy city traffic outside entirely faded into a distant, muffled hum. Only the rhythmic, heavy sound of her steady breathing anchored my spinning mind to reality. I refused to break eye contact with her, fighting a completely losing battle against the heavy flush rising to my cheeks. For years, I had fiercely convinced myself that my total obsession with her was purely fueled by professional hatred. I hated her immaculate presentations, her effortless charm, and the infuriating way she always seemed one step ahead of me. But feeling her body press so heavily against mine, that hatred was rapidly melting into a confusing, molten desire. "Your currency?" I challenged her, desperately trying to inject some familiar venom into my trembling tone. It sounded painfully pathetic, even to my own ringing ears. Chloe chuckled softly, a low, throaty sound that vibrated thrillingly straight through my chest. "Your undivided attention," she murmured, her thumb still tracing small, maddening circles on my sensitive skin. "Your absolute compliance. Your precious time." She listed each arrogant demand with the casual, breathtaking arrogance of a queen claiming her conquered territory. I tried to slide my trapped arms out from under her heavy shadow. She simply shifted her stance, effortlessly trapping my wrists against the white sheets. Her grip was undeniably firm but surprisingly, painfully gentle. It was a physical restraint designed not to hurt, but to completely conquer. "You are completely insane," I breathed out, my chest rising and falling heavily against hers. "Perhaps," she conceded freely, a flicker of raw, unhidden hunger flashing wildly in her dark eyes. "But I am the insane woman who now permanently holds the title to your roof." The familiar power dynamic between us had just undergone a violent, irreversible earthquake. She was no longer just the brilliant woman who ruthlessly stole my well-deserved promotions. She was the incredibly dangerous woman who now entirely controlled my sanctuary. I stared up at her striking face, noticing for the very first time the tiny gold flecks hidden deep within her dark irises. I noticed the slight, inviting parting of her lips, painted a dangerous, alluring shade of crimson. I noticed the agonizing way her gaze dropped to my mouth and lingered there for a fraction of a second too long. This wasn't just a hostile corporate takeover anymore. This was a heavily calculated ambush of the heart. "Let me up right now, Chloe," I warned her, though I made absolutely no physical effort to struggle against her hold. She leaned closer instead, her glossy dark hair falling forward to create an intimate, silken curtain around our faces. We were entirely sealed off from the rest of the judgmental world in this tiny, heated bubble. "Make me," she dared beautifully, her voice dropping into a husky, irresistible whisper. The bold challenge hung heavily in the narrow, charged space between our parted mouths. If I moved even a single millimeter upward, our lips would inevitably collide. I knew she was acutely, brilliantly aware of this devastating geographical trap. She had engineered this exact scenario with the same flawless precision she used to dismantle my marketing campaigns. "You can't just buy my building and expect me to bow down to you," I argued weakly, my voice finally cracking under the pressure. "I don't want you to bow," she replied with devastating softness. Her fingers slowly released my trapped wrists, trailing agonizingly up my arms to tangle deeply in my messy hair. "I want you to yield to me." The sheer, unapologetic audacity of her statement sent a jolt of pure, white-hot electricity through my veins. I wanted to slap her perfect face. I wanted to kiss her fiercely until neither of us could physically breathe. The terrifying truth was that I couldn't decide which powerful urge was actually stronger. "And if I blatantly refuse?" I asked, dangerously testing the limits of this twisted new game. Chloe's mocking smile faded, quickly replaced by a look of intense, predatory focus. "Then I suppose I will just have to resort to a very messy eviction," she lied flawlessly to my face. We both knew with absolute certainty she hadn't spent millions of dollars just to throw me out onto the street. She had bought this massive building solely to build a cage. A beautifully constructed, inescapable cage designed specifically and exclusively for me. "You wouldn't dare," I challenged her, holding her intense, burning stare. "Try me, sweetheart," she countered smoothly, her thumb lightly grazing my quivering lower lip. The sudden physical contact burned like a permanent brand against my flushed skin. A soft, completely involuntary sigh escaped from the back of my throat. Her eyes darkened instantly at the small, revealing sound. The bitter corporate rivalry that had defined our entire 20s evaporated into nothingness in a single instant. It was entirely replaced by something far older, far more primal, and infinitely more dangerous. "Rule number 1 of your new lease," she murmured, dipping her head dangerously lower. Her lips were practically brushing against mine as she spoke the fateful words. You belong to me now. The heavy declaration slammed into my chest, wiping out every single coherent thought I possessed. I squeezed my eyes tightly shut, trying desperately to summon the fiery hatred I had relied on for years to survive her. It was completely gone, washed away entirely by the heavy, intoxicating pull of her magnetic gravity. My hands, finally freed from her earlier grip, cautiously and hesitantly moved upward. I rested my palms gently against the sharp lapels of her expensive silk blazer. I could feel the rapid, incredibly heavy thud of her heartbeat racing beneath the smooth fabric. She was just as deeply affected by this terrifying proximity as I was. That sudden realization gave me a dangerous, overwhelming surge of newfound confidence. Is this exactly how you conduct all your high-stakes real estate transactions? I whispered, opening my eyes to boldly meet her smoldering gaze. Only the specific ones I deeply, personally care about, she replied without a single second of hesitation. The raw, undeniable honesty in her voice completely shattered my last remaining emotional defense. She wasn't playing a cruel corporate game with me anymore. She was finally laying all her hidden cards face up on the table. She had bought my apartment, cornered me in my bedroom, and practically confessed her twisted, long-standing affection. I slowly slid my hands over her rigid shoulders, my fingers tracing the tense, beautiful line of her neck. She shivered visibly under my bold touch, a slight gasp parting her red lips once more. Then I guess we need to thoroughly negotiate the exact terms of this repayment, I countered, pulling her just a fraction of an inch closer to me. Chloe's eyes widened slightly in genuine surprise, clearly not expecting me to match her brazen, dominant energy. A triumphant, genuine smirk finally broke through my lingering apprehension. I dictate all the terms, she reminded me quickly, though her voice completely lacked its earlier, commanding authority. Not if you actually want me to cooperate tonight, I replied smoothly, running my thumb along her sharp jawline. She closed her eyes for a brief, vulnerable second, leaning heavily and willingly into my gentle touch. The terrifying Ice Queen was rapidly melting right above me on my own messy bed. I realized then that I held just as much immense power in this room as the wealthy woman who owned the deed. She might technically own the walls, but she was entirely captive to the woman living inside them. "What are your terms?" she asked softly, her voice tight with heavily restrained desire. I smiled up at her, fully and recklessly embracing the delicious tension humming loudly between us. "We start by discussing the interest rate," I whispered seductively, lifting my chin to close the final, agonizing gap. Our breaths mingled in the microscopic fraction of an inch that separated our lips. I could see the sharp reflection of my own wide, frantic eyes deep within her dark pupils. Chloe didn't pull away, instead, her fingers tightened imperceptibly within the tangled strands of my hair. The silence between us grew agonizingly heavy, thick with a mutual understanding we had denied for half a decade. "Interest," she murmured, the word vibrating directly against my trembling bottom lip. "You always did have a remarkably sharp mind for numbers, even when your own accounts were failing." I refused to flinch at her cruel reminder of my hidden vulnerability. "A good businesswoman knows exactly when to negotiate," I countered, keeping my voice steady despite the frantic hammer of my pulse. "And what makes you think you have a single shred of leverage here?" she asked, her gaze dropping to my mouth again. "Because you are still hovering over me," I whispered, letting my palms slide up the smooth, expensive fabric of her blazer. "If you truly despised me, Chloe, you would have sent a lawyer to hand me an eviction notice. You wouldn't be ruining your immaculate white suit on my cheap duvet." A subtle, dangerous tremor passed through her shoulders at my blunt accusation. The icy composure she wore like heavy armor in the boardroom began to crack, piece by beautiful piece. "Perhaps I simply enjoy watching you squirm beneath my feet," she whispered back, though her voice lacked its usual venom. "Then why is your heart beating faster than mine?" I challenged her, my thumb pressing deliberately against the hollow of her throat. Her pulse was racing wildly, a chaotic rhythm that completely betrayed her calm, arrogant expression. Chloe caught her breath, her eyes darkening until they looked almost entirely black in the fading evening light. She shifted her weight, her thigh pressing firmly against mine, sending a wave of absolute heat straight through my veins. "You think you understand me," she stated softly, a low, dangerous growl vibrating in her chest. I know you have spent 5 years trying to control every single aspect of my life, I replied, holding her intense gaze. And now you have resorted to buying my home just to ensure I can't escape your orbit. Chloe slowly leaned down, tilting her head until her lips brushed the sensitive skin just beneath my ear. A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped my throat, my fingers instantly clawing into the fabric of her shoulders. I don't want you to escape, she confessed against my skin, her warm breath making me shiver violently. I want you exactly where I can see you, every single hour of the day. The sheer, unfiltered honesty of her words completely stripped away my remaining defenses. This wasn't a game of corporate dominance anymore, it was an absolute surrender of her hidden emotions. Tell me the terms of the interest, I whispered into the dark space between us, my voice thick with a sudden, heavy desire. Chloe pulled back just enough to look down into my eyes, a slow, triumphant smile returning to her face. Rule number 1, she began, her finger tracing a slow, maddening line down my collarbone. You will accompany me to every single industry gala, charity dinner, and private event on my calendar. You will stand by my side, look entirely captivated by me, and play the part of my exclusive companion. I arched an eyebrow, trying to mask the sudden thrill expanding in my chest. Your companion? Our entire industry knows we would gladly sabotage each other's careers for a promotion. Then we will give them something far more scandalous to gossip about, she countered smoothly. Rule number 2, she continued, her thumb brushing over my lower lip, parting it slightly. When we are inside the walls of this building, you answer only to me. If I call you at midnight because I want company, you will walk down the hall to my apartment without hesitation. And if I refuse? I asked, my voice dropping into a soft, teasing challenge. You won't, she whispered confidently, her gaze locking onto my mouth with terrifying intensity. Because we both know you have been just as obsessed with me as I have been with you. The truth of her statement hit me like a physical wave, leaving me completely breathless on the mattress. For years, I had channeled every ounce of my passion into competing with her, analyzing her every move, and memorizing her habits. It had never been hatred, it had always been a fierce, burning fascination that I was too terrified to label as love. You are incredibly arrogant, I breathed, my hand sliding up to frame her sharp jawline. I am a woman who obtains exactly what she desires, she corrected softly, leaning down until our noses brushed. The proximity was agonizing, a beautifully orchestrated torture that made every nerve ending in my body scream for contact. I could feel the softness of her skin, the warmth of her breath, and the sheer force of her magnetic attraction. I pulled her down by the lapels of her suit, closing the remaining distance until our lips were practically pressed together. We remained frozen in that hypercharged state for several agonizing seconds, testing the absolute limits of our restraint. Her lips were parted, warm, and invitingly close, a dangerous paradise I was desperate to explore. But Chloe was a master of control, and she knew exactly how to prolong the exquisite tension between us. She didn't kiss me, instead, she let her lips graze mine with a feather-light touch that left me burning for more. Consider this the baseline of our new contract, she murmured against my lips, her voice tight with her own restrained hunger. Before I could protest or pull her closer, she smoothly shifted her weight and stood up from the bed. The sudden loss of her warmth felt like a freezing shock against my sensitized skin. I lay there, utterly flushed and disheveled, watching her calmly smooth down the wrinkles of her white silk trousers. She adjusted her silver necklace with perfect, practiced precision, instantly transforming back into the untouchable Ice Queen. If it weren't for the slight flush on her cheeks and her heavy breathing, I would have thought the last 10 minutes were a hallucination. The first event is tomorrow evening at 8, she announced, her voice regaining its crisp, professional authority. She walked toward the bedroom doorway, pausing just before she stepped out into the hallway. I expect you to be ready, and I expect you to wear something that matches my suit. I sat up on the bed, resting my elbows on my knees, a genuine, amused smile finally breaking through my daze. Are you going to dictate my wardrobe now, landlord? I called out, my voice dripping with newfound confidence. Chloe turned her head slightly, looking at me over her shoulder with a look that promised absolute trouble. I dictate everything now, sweetheart, she replied smoothly. Oh, and one final detail for the morning. She leaned against the doorframe, her dark eyes scanning my messy appearance with lazy satisfaction. I take my coffee black with a single sugar cube. You will bring it to my office at precisely 8:30 before our morning marketing presentation. Don't be late for your first payment. With those final words, she turned and walked out of my apartment, the heavy front door clicking shut moments later. The silence that returned to the room felt entirely different now, no longer empty, but charged with a lingering scent of bergamot. I collapsed backward onto the pillows, staring up at the ceiling as my heart gradually slowed its frantic pace. My hands still tingled from the memory of her skin, and my lips still burned from her agonizingly close proximity. She had successfully trapped me, cornered me, and forced me into a contract that stripped away all my control. Yet, as I buried my face into the sheets that now smelled faintly of her expensive perfume, I realized something terrifying. I had never felt more alive, and I had absolutely no intention of breaking a single rule of her lease. The harsh morning sunlight filtered through my slightly parted blinds. It instantly reminded me that my entire world had fundamentally shifted overnight. I lay perfectly still under the rumpled sheets, staring blankly up at the white ceiling. The lingering scent of cold bergamot was still stubbornly woven deep into my soft pillowcases. It was a constant, phantom reminder of the beautiful, dangerous woman who had forcefully pinned me down right here. I slowly dragged myself out of bed, my mind racing wildly with the insane reality of my new existence. Chloe was no longer just the ruthless vice president of marketing who constantly undermined my campaigns. She was now the sole owner of my personal sanctuary and the absolute master of my crushing financial debt. More terrifyingly, she was the woman who had boldly demanded my complete surrender as her preferred method of payment. I walked into my small kitchen, my bare feet padding softly against the cold hardwood floor. I reached for the darkest, strongest coffee roast I had stored away in my upper cabinet. She had specifically demanded her morning cup completely black, with exactly one single sugar cube. The absolute precision of her request was just another subtle demonstration of her obsessive need for control. I watched the dark liquid drip slowly into the glass pot, my own reflection staring back at me from the shiny appliance. I looked entirely different today, somehow fundamentally altered by the heavy weight of her possessive gaze. I dressed meticulously, choosing a tailored charcoal blazer and a crisp, silk blouse. I desperately needed to look like the fierce professional I had always been, not the flustered tenant she had left behind. The long subway ride into the city felt completely surreal, like a blurry dream sequence I couldn't wake up from. The towering glass structure of our corporate agency loomed ahead, usually a battlefield I entered with familiar dread. Today, however, stepping through those massive revolving doors felt like walking straight into a beautifully orchestrated trap. I held the insulated paper cup firmly in my hand, the intense heat radiating straight into my cold palms. The long elevator ride up to the executive floor was suffocatingly quiet. The polished chrome doors finally slid open, revealing the sleek, minimalist lobby of our department. I completely ignored the curious, lingering glances from the junior copywriters as I marched straight toward the corner office. Chloe's office was a massive fortress of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering complete visibility of her executive domain. I paused just outside her closed door, taking a deep, steadying breath to forcefully calm my racing pulse. Through the transparent wall, I could clearly see her seated behind her massive mahogany desk. She was wearing a stunning, tailored black suit today, the stark dark color making her pale skin look almost luminescent. Her dark hair was pulled back into an immaculate, severe twist, leaving her sharp, beautiful jawline completely exposed. She was typing rapidly on her sleek laptop, her expression a perfect mask of cold, unapproachable efficiency. No one looking at her right now could possibly imagine the heavy, breathless heat she had radiated in my private bedroom. I knocked twice, the sharp sound echoing loudly in the strangely quiet corridor. Her dark eyes snapped upward instantly, locking securely onto my face through the thick glass barrier. A microscopic, terrifyingly triumphant smile ghosted across her painted lips for just a fraction of a second. "Come in," she called out, her smooth voice easily penetrating the heavy soundproof door. I pushed the metal handle and stepped bravely into the lion's den, the familiar chill of her air-conditioned office washing over me. I walked deliberately across the plush gray carpet, absolutely refusing to break eye contact with her. I placed the steaming paper cup directly in the exact center of her immaculate wooden desk. Black, with exactly 1 sugar cube, I stated, keeping my voice carefully neutral and entirely professional. Chloe didn't immediately reach for the warm beverage. Instead, she leaned back slowly in her tall leather executive chair, observing me with a deeply analytical, piercing gaze. "You look incredibly tense this morning," she observed smoothly, her tone dropping into a low, intimate register. "I have a major marketing presentation to deliver shortly," I replied quickly, gripping my tablet tightly to hide my trembling hands. "I assure you, my focus is entirely on my professional responsibilities." Chloe finally reached out, her slender fingers elegantly wrapping around the warm white paper cup. "Is that so?" she challenged quietly, taking a slow, deliberate sip without ever taking her dark eyes off mine. "Perfectly brewed," she noted casually, setting the cup back down with a soft, decisive click. "You follow instructions remarkably well when properly motivated." The heavy double meaning layered in her words sent a violent, electric jolt straight down my spine. She wasn't talking about the coffee at all, and we both fully understood the underlying threat. "I simply fulfill the basic terms of my assigned obligations," I countered bravely, leaning slightly forward over the edge of her desk. "Nothing more, and certainly nothing less." Chloe's eyes darkened ominously, a sudden flash of pure, predatory instinct breaking through her calm corporate facade. She abruptly stood up from her chair, her tall, athletic frame casting a long shadow across the bright room. She slowly walked around the wide edge of the mahogany desk, deliberately eliminating the protective barrier between us. I stubbornly stood my ground, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs as she boldly invaded my personal space. She stopped just a few inches away from me, the intoxicating scent of bergamot instantly clouding my usually sharp senses again. "We both know your new obligations extend far beyond fetching my morning beverages," she murmured, her voice a velvety, dangerous threat. She reached out confidently, her index finger lightly tracing the sharp lapel of my charcoal blazer. The subtle, brief touch burned straight through the heavy fabric like a localized, concentrated fire. "I am eagerly looking forward to your presentation," she whispered, leaning in just a fraction closer. "I want to see exactly how well you perform under extreme, sustained pressure today." Before I could formulate a witty, biting response, the loud, sharp ring of her desk phone shattered the heavy silence between us. The sudden interruption was a harsh, jarring reminder of the corporate reality happening just outside her private glass walls. Chloe sighed softly, a very brief look of genuine annoyance crossing her strikingly perfect features. She took a deliberate step back, instantly reassembling her impenetrable, icy professional armor. "The boardroom is waiting," she announced crisply, gesturing elegantly toward the heavy wooden door. "Do not disappoint me in there." I turned swiftly on my heel and walked out of her office, my legs feeling strangely unsteady beneath me. The massive conference room down the hall was already packed with our senior executives and anxious creative team members. The air inside was thick with the usual competitive anxiety that always preceded any major quarterly pitch. I took my designated position at the front of the room, quickly connecting my tablet to the main projector screen. A few tense moments later, the heavy double doors swung open, and Chloe swept majestically into the room. The entire atmosphere shifted instantly, the low, nervous chatter dying down into immediate, deeply respectful silence. She took her customary seat at the very head of the long table, assuming the ultimate position of undisputed authority. She elegantly steepled her fingers together, resting her chin lightly on her hands as she looked directly at me. "Begin," she commanded simply, her voice echoing with absolute, unquestionable command. I launched straight into my presentation, my extensive professional training taking over as I smoothly clicked through the detailed slides. I passionately pitched the new demographic strategies, the innovative visual storyboards, and the highly ambitious projected conversion rates. Usually, this was the exact moment Chloe would begin systematically and ruthlessly tearing my creative ideas apart. She historically loved to interrupt me with sharp, highly critical questions designed specifically to humiliate me in front of the board. But today, she remained entirely, terrifyingly silent. She wasn't even looking at the vibrant, carefully constructed data charts projected on the massive screen behind me. She was looking exclusively and relentlessly at me. Her dark eyes tracked my every single movement as I paced confidently across the front of the large room. She watched the way my mouth moved as I articulated highly complex market penetration theories. She watched the subtle, expressive gestures of my hands, the slight sway of my hips, and the confident lift of my chin. It was a completely unashamed, incredibly thorough visual consumption of my entire physical being. The rest of the nervous executives in the room seemed blissfully unaware of the intense, silent dialogue happening between us. They were frantically taking detailed notes, completely oblivious to the fact that their fearsome vice president was currently undressing me with her eyes. The sheer, unapologetic audacity of her public gaze made my skin flush violently, threatening to ruin my composed facade. I stumbled awkwardly over a crucial transition, my voice faltering briefly as her heavy gaze dropped deliberately to my lips. A few colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their expensive chairs, exchanging nervous glances at my incredibly rare, uncharacteristic mistake. Chloe simply tilted her head slightly, a deeply amused, almost wicked glimmer appearing briefly in her dark eyes. She knew exactly the devastating effect she was having on me, and she was clearly relishing every single second of my quiet torture. I forced myself to quickly recover, taking a deep breath and deliberately accelerating the pace of my pitch to overcompensate. When I finally concluded the lengthy presentation, a heavy, deeply anticipatory silence fell over the massive boardroom. Everyone collectively turned their heads to look directly at the head of the table, nervously waiting for the inevitable execution. Chloe slowly unclasped her hands, leaning back deeply in her leather chair with an air of absolute regality. The central concept is remarkably aggressive, she began slowly, her voice smooth and completely unreadable. It requires a complete, uncompromising takeover of the target audience's attention, leaving absolutely no room for any competitors. She paused deliberately, her dark eyes locking onto mine with the overwhelming intensity of a physical strike. I find that level of absolute dominance to be highly effective and deeply compelling. A collective, entirely silent gasp rippled quickly through the assembled team members around the table. Chloe had just publicly endorsed one of my major campaigns without a single revision or cruel, biting critique. It was an unprecedented, almost miraculous event in the long, bloody history of our bitter rivalry. However, she continued smoothly, leaning forward and placing her forearms deliberately on the polished mahogany table. A concept exactly this aggressive requires total, unquestioning commitment from the original creator. I need to know with absolute certainty that you are entirely invested in this project, body and mind. The heavy double meaning was so blatant, so dangerously obvious to me, that I suddenly felt incredibly dizzy. I am entirely committed to seeing this through to the very end, I promised her bravely, my voice dropping an octave lower than usual. Excellent, she declared decisively, rising gracefully from her chair to signal the abrupt end of the morning meeting. I expect you to personally accompany me tonight to the industry gala so we can thoroughly discuss the finer implementation details. The entire room stared at me in absolute, wide-eyed shock as she effectively hijacked my entire evening schedule in front of everyone. I simply nodded once, quietly accepting the invisible, heavy collar she had just publicly fastened around my neck. I will be ready, I confirmed softly, packing up my tablet with slightly trembling hands. Chloe walked confidently past me toward the exit, her shoulder brushing intimately against mine for a fleeting, electric second. I sent a large package to your apartment, she murmured so quietly that only I could possibly hear her words. Wear it tonight. She swept gracefully out of the room, leaving me completely alone in the chaotic aftermath of her overwhelming gravity. I gripped the hard edge of the conference table tightly, taking a slow, incredibly shaky breath. The game had fundamentally changed, and the stakes were now incredibly, terrifyingly high. I was no longer just fighting for a simple promotion in a stressful corporate agency. I was fighting a completely losing battle against the total, consuming surrender of my own heart. The heavy black box waiting on my pristine kitchen counter felt like a beautiful, dangerous threat. I untied the thick silk ribbon with trembling fingers. The lid lifted to reveal a cascade of luxurious midnight blue velvet. It was a stunning, floor-length gown that perfectly matched the sharp aesthetic of her usual attire. She had memorized my exact measurements without ever asking me a single direct question. I slipped the cool fabric over my skin, letting it drape flawlessly across my hips and shoulders. The gown hugged every distinct curve with a terrifying, unapologetic precision. I stared at my reflection in the intensely bright vanity mirror. My pale skin contrasted beautifully against the dark, heavy material. My collarbone was exposed, completely bare and intensely vulnerable to her inevitable gaze. A sleek black limousine idled quietly on the brightly illuminated street below my apartment building. The uniformed driver opened the heavy rear door without speaking a single word. I slid into the plush leather interior, immediately engulfed by the familiar, intoxicating scent of bergamot. Chloe sat gracefully in the far corner of the spacious back seat. The soft ambient lighting of the vehicle illuminated her sharp, absolutely flawless facial features. She wore an impeccably tailored midnight blue tuxedo jacket that exactly matched the deep color of my dress. Her dark hair was styled into loose, elegant waves that cascaded over her rigid, athletic shoulders. She turned her head slowly, allowing her dark, piercing eyes to sweep over my entire body. The sudden silence in the enclosed space was heavy enough to completely crush my lungs. "You look entirely breathtaking," she murmured smoothly into the quiet cabin. A fierce, uncontrollable blush rushed violently to my cheeks at her unexpected, genuine compliment. "You orchestrated this matching wardrobe very deliberately," I pointed out, trying desperately to maintain my professional composure. "I want the entire industry to know exactly who you belong to tonight," she replied without a single ounce of hesitation. The heavy vehicle glided smoothly through the bustling, brilliantly lit city streets. Bright neon signs and clear streetlights flashed rapidly across her fiercely serious face. She reached smoothly across the wide leather seat, her long fingers elegantly capturing my restless hand. A sudden, intense jolt of electricity shot straight up my arm at the unexpected physical contact. Her thumb began drawing slow, hypnotic circles across my highly sensitive knuckles. "Remember the specific rules we established this morning," she whispered, leaning slightly closer to my face. "You stay closely by my side, and you play the part of a deeply captivated partner." "I don't think I will have to pretend very hard," I confessed quietly, my gaze dropping to our intertwined fingers. The sudden vulnerability in my voice made her firm grip on my hand tighten noticeably. We finally arrived at the grand entrance of the prestigious, brightly lit hotel venue. A blinding array of camera flashes erupted the exact moment the driver opened my heavy door. The extremely bright, clear white light illuminated the red carpet in spectacular, overwhelming detail. Chloe stepped out first, immediately commanding the absolute attention of every single photographer present. She turned back gracefully, offering her hand to me with a flawlessly practiced, charming smile. I placed my palm securely in hers, letting her guide me confidently out of the dark vehicle. A collective, highly audible gasp rippled rapidly through the gathered crowd of industry professionals. We had spent half a decade famously avoiding each other at these exact corporate social gatherings. Now, her strong arm was wrapped securely around my narrow waist, pulling me flush against her side. The blindingly bright camera flashes captured every single nuanced detail of our shocking public debut. We walked seamlessly together into the massive, brilliantly illuminated main ballroom. Thousands of sparkling crystal tiers hung elegantly from the massive, heavy chandeliers overhead. The massive room was bathed in a clear, golden light that made the entire space look incredibly cinematic. Waiters expertly navigated the crowded floor with heavy silver trays of incredibly expensive champagne. The low hum of sophisticated networking completely stopped the moment we slowly descended the grand staircase. Every major executive and creative director openly stared at our tightly intertwined hands. I instinctively tried to pull slightly away from her intensely secure grasp. Chloe simply tightened her firm grip, her long fingers pressing deeply into the soft velvet at my waist. "Do not pull away from me," she commanded softly, her warm lips brushing delicately against my earlobe. "Let them carefully look at us." A senior partner from a rival agency quickly approached us with a visibly bewildered expression. He held a crystal glass of expensive bourbon, his eyes darting frantically between our stoic faces. "Chloe, I must openly admit this is the absolute last pairing I ever expected to witness," he stated awkwardly. Chloe offered him a sharp, highly predatory smile that belonged entirely in a ruthless boardroom negotiation. "Strategic alliances often happen when you finally recognize the absolute best talent in the entire room," she replied smoothly. She looked down at me, her dark eyes suddenly softening with a sickeningly convincing, deep affection. And we recently discovered our specific interests align perfectly in private matters as well. The senior partner choked slightly on his expensive amber bourbon. I forced myself to lean much deeper into her warm embrace, resting my cheek lightly against her sturdy shoulder. She simply made me a highly lucrative offer I absolutely could not refuse, I added boldly, looking directly up at her face. The hidden, terrifying truth buried deep inside my casual joke made Chloe's dark eyes flash with sudden, intense heat. The rival executive quickly excused himself, practically running away from the overwhelming energy radiating around us. "You are a remarkably quick learner," Chloe whispered, guiding me smoothly toward a slightly quieter corner of the brightly lit hall. "I had a very strict, highly demanding teacher this morning," I countered, reaching up to gently adjust the sharp lapel of her midnight blue tuxedo. My trembling fingers lingered entirely too long against the warm, solid expanse of her chest. She swiftly caught my wrist, bringing my pale knuckles up to her mouth for a shockingly tender, highly public kiss. Her perfectly painted lips were incredibly soft against my skin, sending a devastating wave of heat straight to my core. "I am entirely serious about the specific rules of tonight," she murmured softly against my trapped fingers. "Every single person in this bright room needs to clearly understand that you are completely off-limits to them." I stared deeply into her dark, mesmerizing eyes, finally understanding the true, terrifying depth of her territorial instinct. She hadn't just bought my apartment building to casually collect an overdue monthly rent check. She had executed a flawless, highly aggressive takeover of my entire physical and emotional existence. The beautiful string quartet played a slow, incredibly elegant melody in the grand background. Couples began moving gracefully onto the brightly polished, reflective marble dance floor. "Dance with me," she ordered gently, slipping her warm hand smoothly down to my curving hip. "I thought you completely despised any form of public displays of affection," I challenged playfully. "I only despise them when they do not directly involve you," she replied honestly, pulling me firmly onto the floor. The exceptionally bright, clear lighting from the massive chandeliers above illuminated the stunning golden flecks deep in her irises. My arms naturally wrapped around her neck, my fingers burying themselves deeply into the soft hair at the nape of her neck. Her strong hands rested firmly on my waist, guiding my physical movements with effortless, sweeping confidence. We moved entirely as one cohesive unit, flawlessly synchronized despite 5 long years of bitter fighting. The heavy hostility that used to strictly define our interactions had completely dissolved into pure, raw chemistry. "You are staring intently at me," she observed quietly, a slight, deeply knowing smirk playing on her lips. "I am simply evaluating my completely domineering new landlord," I fired back, though my breathless tone entirely ruined the intended sarcasm. "And what exactly is your current assessment?" she asked softly, spinning me out and pulling me back flush against her chest. The forceful, perfectly calculated collision knocked the remaining breath completely out of my lungs. "I think my landlord is a deeply dangerous woman," I whispered sincerely, my lips hovering dangerously close to hers. "You have absolutely no idea," she agreed softly, her intense gaze dropping to my mouth with unmistakable, raw hunger. The entire crowded ballroom faded away, the extremely bright lights and the loud, chaotic chatter dissolving into distant white noise. I was entirely consumed by the heavy, irresistible gravity of her overwhelming physical presence. Her thumb slowly traced the bare, sensitive line of my collarbone, an intimate, burning touch that completely ignored the hundreds of people watching us. She was publicly claiming me, branding me physically as hers in front of the very industry that once fueled our relentless war. I realized with terrifying, absolute clarity that I didn't want to violently fight her anymore. I deeply wanted to surrender completely to the irresistible pull of her beautifully dangerous game. The classical music swelled to a massive, dramatic finish, but Chloe did not loosen her firm grip on me. She held me incredibly tightly against her, her racing heart beating heavily against my own chest. "You entirely belong to me now," she whispered fiercely into the quiet, highly charged space between us. "I know," I breathed back softly, finally accepting the beautiful, terrifying truth of my undeniable debt. The heavy glass doors of the grand ballroom glided shut behind us. The overwhelming symphony of clinking champagne glasses and loud networking instantly vanished. We stepped out onto the expansive private terrace overlooking the glowing metropolis. The crisp evening air washed over my heated skin in a sudden rush of absolute relief. The massive skyline of the city stretched out endlessly before us. Millions of brilliant white lights illuminated the surrounding architecture with breathtaking clarity. The radiant glow of the urban landscape cast sharp, clear shadows across the marble floor. It was an intensely bright, cinematic environment that made hiding completely impossible. Chloe did not let go of my hand as she guided me toward the transparent edge. Her firm grip sent constant, undeniable pulses of electricity straight up my bare arm. She leaned her tall frame gracefully against the cold glass barrier. The incredibly bright city lights reflected perfectly in her dark, mesmerizing eyes. She looked utterly flawless in her sharp midnight blue tuxedo jacket. The wind caught the loose waves of her dark hair, sweeping them gently across her pale cheek. I stood completely frozen, entirely captivated by the raw visual power of her presence. "You performed your assigned role remarkably well in there," she noted smoothly. Her voice was entirely different now, stripped of its usual sharp corporate armor. It was soft, incredibly low, and laced with a heavy, unspoken hunger. "I am simply a very dedicated tenant honoring her strict lease agreement," I replied carefully. I desperately tried to keep my breathing even, but my chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow bursts. Chloe let out a soft, dark chuckle that vibrated beautifully in the quiet space. "You are a terrible liar when you are nervous," she observed effortlessly. She unbuttoned the front of her expensive jacket with a slow, deliberate motion. The elegant gesture was entirely casual yet fiercely, overwhelmingly dominant. She turned her body completely toward me, blocking out the rest of the illuminated world. "You did not lean into my touch just to mock our confused business rivals. You did it because you deeply, desperately wanted to." Her absolute certainty slammed into my fragile defenses like a physical blow. I crossed my arms defensively over the soft velvet of my bodice. "You are incredibly arrogant to assume you know exactly what I want," I challenged her. My voice wavered noticeably, completely ruining the intended effect of my bold statement. Chloe took a slow, deliberate step closer to me. The faint, sophisticated scent of bergamot instantly surrounded me, cutting through the crisp air. "I know exactly what you want because it mirrors my own endless frustration," she countered softly. She reached out and gently uncrossed my defensive arms. Her warm fingers slid smoothly down to capture my wrists, holding them with exquisite tenderness. "We have spent years fighting a completely pointless, exhausting war. We tore down each other's ideas just to guarantee we remained in each other's direct orbit." She lifted her hands, gently resting her warm palms flat against my bare shoulders. The sudden, intense heat of her skin practically burned a permanent mark into my flesh. "I am officially ending the war tonight," she declared with absolute, stunning finality. I stared up into her incredibly bright, illuminated face. The usual hostile tension that defined our entire history was completely gone. It was replaced entirely by a heavy, suffocating wave of pure desire. "You cannot simply command a ceasefire just because you bought my building," I whispered breathlessly. "I can," she replied smoothly, her thumb tracing the sensitive line of my collarbone. "And I fully intend to collect the specific spoils of my hard-fought victory." She stepped entirely into my personal space, forcing me to lean slightly backward against the cold glass. The stark contrast between the freezing barrier behind me and her burning body in front of me was maddening. "What exactly are you demanding now?" I asked, my voice barely a quiet, trembling sigh. "The truth," she murmured, lowering her head until our faces were merely an inch apart. Her warm breath ghosted delightfully over my parted lips. "I want you to openly admit that you belong entirely to me. I want you to stop hiding behind your fragile, professional resentment." I closed my eyes, fighting a completely losing battle against the overwhelming pull of her gravity. My hands moved instinctively, rising to grasp the smooth lapels of her dark tuxedo. I could feel the rapid, frantic beating of her heart pounding loudly against my own knuckles. She was just as terrified of this monumental shift as I was. That singular realization gave me a sudden, reckless surge of beautiful courage. I opened my eyes, meeting her intense, smoldering gaze under the bright city lights. You drove me absolutely insane for years, I confessed openly into the quiet night. I know, she whispered back, her dark eyes flashing with a mix of triumph and relief. You made me question every single decision I ever made in that agency. I did it solely to force you to look at me, she admitted, her voice thick with naked vulnerability. I slowly slid my hands up from her lapels, wrapping my arms completely around her neck. I tangled my fingers deeply into the soft, dark hair at the nape of her neck. A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped her red lips at my bold, sudden movement. You are a remarkably cruel landlord, I breathed out, lifting my chin slightly toward hers. Then punish me for it, she challenged beautifully, her gaze dropping permanently to my mouth. The final, agonizing string of restraint snapped violently between us. I pulled her down exactly as she surged fiercely forward. Our lips finally crashed together in a blinding, explosive collision of absolute heat. It was not a gentle, polite kiss meant for a crowded ballroom floor. It was a desperate, messy, and totally consuming collision of two highly competitive souls. Her strong arms wrapped instantly around my narrow waist. She pulled me flush against her athletic frame, eliminating every single millimeter of empty space. The soft velvet of my gown crushed completely against the stiff fabric of her tuxedo jacket. I opened my mouth, granting her the absolute access she silently demanded. She tasted like expensive champagne and incredibly sweet, lingering danger. My hands gripped her shoulders desperately as she tilted my head to deepen the intense connection. A soft, completely uninhibited moan slipped from the very back of my throat. Chloe swallowed the tiny sound, her grip on my waist tightening with sudden, fierce possessiveness. She backed me firmly against the thick glass balcony rail. Her body pressed deeply into mine, offering a solid, heavy anchor in the spinning world. Every single logical thought in my brain completely short-circuited and vanished. I was entirely consumed by the intoxicating rhythm of her demanding mouth. We kissed like we were desperately trying to make up for half a decade of wasted time. The bright, clear light of the city washed over us, illuminating our deeply tangled silhouettes. It was a complete, unapologetic surrender happening in vivid, high-definition clarity. I ran my tongue lightly along her lower lip, tasting the fierce saltiness of our shared breath. She groaned softly, trailing one hand up my back to tangle firmly in my messy hair. She angled my face perfectly, taking complete, masterful control of the passionate exchange. I willingly melted completely into her strong embrace. The fierce independent woman I used to be was entirely gone. I was entirely reduced to a trembling, aching mess in the arms of my worst enemy. We finally broke apart, both of us gasping desperately for the thin, cool air. Our foreheads rested perfectly against each other. Our chests heaved rapidly in perfect, beautiful synchronization. Chloe's dark eyes were completely dilated, making them look almost entirely black in the brilliant light. Her usually immaculate lipstick was entirely ruined, smeared softly across her beautiful mouth. I knew my own appearance was equally compromised and entirely exposed. She lifted a trembling hand, her thumb wiping a tiny smudge of color from the corner of my lip. That, she breathed out heavily, her chest rising against mine, was vastly superior to arguing in a cold boardroom. A breathless, genuine laugh bubbled up completely unprompted from my chest. It certainly changes the dynamic of our future corporate meetings, I agreed softly. Chloe smiled, a devastatingly beautiful, genuinely happy expression that completely transformed her sharp face. She pressed a soft, lingering kiss directly to the sensitive skin of my exposed temple. You are never returning to that tiny apartment alone again, she stated with absolute authority. Are you forcefully evicting me already? I teased, leaning my heavy head against her shoulder. I am officially relocating you, she corrected smoothly, wrapping her arms securely around me once more. You will stay in the penthouse with me. The sheer, staggering magnitude of her demand should have terrified me completely. She was rapidly dismantling my entire independent life, piece by beautiful piece. Yet, listening to the steady, comforting beat of her heart against my ear, I felt no fear. I only felt a deep, overwhelming sense of inevitable belonging. I suppose I do owe you a considerable amount of debt, I murmured softly into her expensive jacket. And the interest rate just compounded significantly, she whispered back, kissing the crown of my head. I closed my eyes, fully absorbing the bright, clear glow of the city surrounding our private bubble. The ruthless vice president had officially won the ultimate, high-stakes game. And for the very first time in my entire competitive life, I was deeply, profoundly thrilled to lose. The smooth, silent ascent of the private elevator felt entirely like a thrilling journey to another world. The polished chrome doors glided open to reveal the breathtaking expanse of her luxurious penthouse. Chloe stepped forward and pressed a small silver panel on the pristine white wall. The entire massive space was instantly flooded with incredibly bright, crystal-clear lighting. There were absolutely no dark corners or hidden shadows in this flawlessly designed modern sanctuary. The intense, clear overhead lights reflected brilliantly off the polished white marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a magnificent, unobstructed view of the brilliantly glowing metropolis below. The environment was so stark, so brilliantly illuminated, that hiding any emotion was completely impossible. She casually tossed her expensive silver clutch onto the massive, clear glass entryway table. The sharp, echoing click of the metal hitting the glass resonated loudly in the quiet space. I stood hesitantly near the entrance, suddenly feeling incredibly exposed under the brilliant, uncompromising light. My heavy midnight blue velvet gown felt like armor that I no longer needed. Chloe turned slowly to face me, her dark eyes scanning my rigid posture with heavy, undeniable satisfaction. She gracefully slipped her matching suit jacket off her shoulders and tossed it carelessly onto a white leather sofa. The crisp white silk shirt she wore underneath clung perfectly to her strong, athletic frame. She slowly undid the first 2 buttons of her collar, exposing the incredibly smooth, pale skin of her throat. Every single movement she made was captured with high-definition clarity under the bright ceiling lamps. "You look like you are preparing to face a corporate firing squad," she noted with a soft, amused smirk. "I am simply evaluating the full extent of my new, mandatory living arrangements," I replied defensively. My voice sounded terribly weak, completely lacking its usual sharp, competitive edge. Chloe closed the distance between us with slow, deliberate, and incredibly confident steps. The familiar, intoxicating scent of bergamot washed over me, completely erasing the smell of the city air. She stopped just inches away, her towering presence entirely consuming my direct line of sight. "This is no longer just a living arrangement," she corrected me, her voice dropping to a smooth, velvety whisper. "This is a total, comprehensive repossession of all your previously held assets." A violent shiver ran straight down my spine at the sheer, unapologetic possessiveness of her words. She reached out gracefully, her long fingers lightly tracing the bare, sensitive skin of my exposed shoulder. The intense, clear lighting overhead perfectly illuminated the slight, involuntary trembling of my body. "Turn around," she commanded softly, her dark eyes locking fiercely onto mine. I hesitated for only a fraction of a second before slowly turning my back toward her. The heavy silence in the brightly lit room was suddenly completely deafening. I could feel the intense, radiating heat of her body standing directly behind me. Her cool fingers gently brushed the loose strands of my hair away from the back of my neck. She let her soft hands rest heavily on my bare shoulders, anchoring me securely to the shiny marble floor. "You wore this dress exactly as I envisioned you would," she murmured directly against my ear. Her warm breath sent a powerful, electrical shock straight down my highly sensitive spine. I felt the cool metal of the long zipper at the center of my back. Chloe gripped the tiny zipper pull firmly, but she did not pull it down immediately. She let her knuckles rest gently against my spine, allowing the excruciating tension to build. "Are you going to formally evict me from this dress too?" I breathed out, completely unable to control my erratic pulse. "I am simply collecting my mandatory security deposit," she replied with devastating smoothness. She slowly began to pull the zipper down, millimeter by agonizing millimeter. The heavy velvet fabric parted gradually, exposing my bare back to the cool, conditioned air of the penthouse. The incredibly bright lighting highlighted every single goosebump forming rapidly on my pale skin. Her knuckles brushed intimately against my spine with every tiny downward movement. I bit my lower lip fiercely, desperately trying to suppress the soft moan rising in my throat. She dragged the zipper all the way down to the small of my back, finally stopping the sweet torture. The heavy velvet dress instantly lost its secure hold, slipping dangerously off my rigid shoulders. I quickly caught the thick fabric at my chest, holding it up with frantically trembling hands. Chloe stepped even closer, her chest pressing completely flush against my exposed back. Her strong arms wrapped securely around my narrow waist from behind, locking me tightly in her embrace. She buried her face deeply into the crook of my neck, inhaling my scent with raw, unhidden hunger. "You smell exactly like victory," she whispered, her lips brushing softly against my erratic pulse point. "You are completely obsessed with winning," I managed to say, leaning back heavily into her solid warmth. "I am completely obsessed with you," she corrected instantly, completely abandoning all her previous corporate pride. The absolute sincerity in her low voice shattered the very last brick of my emotional fortress. I let my hands drop entirely from my chest, willingly surrendering my final physical defense. The heavy velvet gown pulled beautifully into a dark puddle of fabric right at my feet. I stood there clad only in delicate lace, completely exposed under the brightest, most unforgiving lights in the city. Chloe did not immediately turn me around to face her. Instead, she let her hands wander slowly upward, her warm palms sliding over my ribs with exquisite tenderness. She traced the exact shape of my waist, perfectly memorizing every curve and line of my body. The brilliant, clear illumination of the room made the intimate moment feel incredibly sacred and intensely real. She turned me around smoothly, her dark eyes burning with a fiery, overwhelming intensity. She looked at me like I was a priceless artifact she had spent her entire life trying to acquire. Her gaze was completely steady, intensely focused, and entirely devoid of any former hostility. "You are absolutely breathtaking," she breathed, her voice cracking slightly with raw, unfiltered emotion. She gently cupped my face in both of her hands, her thumbs sweeping softly over my flushed cheekbones. I reached up and grasped her wrists, my fingers completely dwarfed by the solid strength of her forearms. "You are completely ruining my reputation as a fiercely independent woman," I whispered sincerely. "Good," she replied decisively, stepping completely into my personal space. "You do not need to be fiercely independent when you belong entirely to me." She tilted her head and captured my lips in a deep, overwhelmingly demanding kiss. There was no hesitation, no playful corporate banter, and absolutely no holding back. It was a total, consuming invasion that completely demanded my absolute surrender. I opened my mouth willingly, letting her taste the sweet, breathless compliance she so desperately wanted. Her tongue swept masterfully against mine, perfectly dictating the rapid, heavy rhythm of our exchange. My hands flew up to tangle deeply into the loose, dark waves of her beautifully styled hair. She groaned loudly into my mouth, the deep, throaty sound vibrating violently against my own lips. She abruptly wrapped her strong arms tightly around my waist, lifting me completely off the bright marble floor. A sharp gasp escaped my mouth as my feet dangled uselessly in the air. I instinctively wrapped my legs securely around her narrow waist to anchor myself. She carried me effortlessly across the massive, brilliantly illuminated living room. We passed clearly reflected images of our tangled bodies in the massive, spotless glass windows. She walked straight through the wide archway into the grand, master bedroom. The lighting in here was equally bright and clear, leaving absolutely nothing to the imagination. A massive, incredibly soft king-sized bed dominated the absolute center of the pure white room. She dropped me gently onto the center of the plush mattress, immediately following me down. She hovered heavily over me, her knees planted firmly on either side of my hips. Her crisp white shirt was completely wrinkled now, the pristine fabric entirely ruined by my frantic grip. She looked down at me, her chest heaving heavily, her dark eyes entirely dilated with pure desire. "Tell me exactly who you belong to," she demanded softly, her tone brooking absolutely no defiance. "I belong to my landlord," I replied, a genuinely brilliant, wicked smile spreading across my flushed face. She let out a frustrated, incredibly breathless laugh, completely dropping her forehead to rest heavily against mine. "You are going to be a highly difficult tenant," she warned affectionately, brushing her nose softly against my own. "It is written strictly into the fine print of the lease," I countered, pulling her face back down to mine. The remarkably bright lights overhead burned steadily, bearing silent, brilliant witness to our complete surrender. The bitter, exhausting war that had defined our professional lives was finally, officially over. The deeply passionate, endlessly beautiful reign of my new captor had officially begun. The brilliant morning sun poured directly through the massive glass windows of the penthouse. It filled the expansive master bedroom with an intensely bright, uncompromising clarity. There were absolutely no shadows to hide in, no dark corners to retreat into. Every single surface in the room gleamed with a pristine, pure white radiance. I slowly opened my eyes, blinking against the exceptionally clear, golden light washing over the bed. The heavy, warm weight draped securely across my waist anchored me entirely to the present reality. Chloe was sleeping soundly beside me, her athletic body pressed entirely flush against my back. Her strong arm held me incredibly close, refusing to allow even a millimeter of distance between us. I carefully turned my head against the soft white pillow to look at her resting face. The intensely bright natural light illuminated her sharp, beautiful features with high-definition perfection. The fearsome, untouchable corporate queen was completely gone in the quiet stillness of the morning. Her dark eyelashes cast tiny, delicate shadows against her flushed pale skin. Her usually painted lips were bare, slightly parted, and looked unbelievably soft. The familiar, intoxicating scent of cold bergamot surrounded me, woven deeply into the crisp sheets. I tentatively reached out, my trembling fingers gently brushing a loose wave of dark hair from her forehead. Her brow furrowed slightly at the feather-light touch, and a low, resonant groan rumbled deep in her chest. She did not wake up completely, but her arm tightened instantly around my narrow waist. She pulled me forcefully backward, completely trapping me against her solid, warm body. "Stop overthinking," she murmured, her morning voice incredibly raspy, husky, and devastatingly deep. I let out a soft, genuine laugh, my back vibrating against her chest. "How do you automatically know I am overthinking?" I whispered into the bright, silent room. She finally opened her eyes, the stunning gold flecks in her dark irises catching the brilliant sunlight perfectly. "Because I have spent 5 long years completely studying your every single habit," she replied effortlessly. She shifted her weight gracefully, rising onto one elbow to hover securely over me. The clear overhead lighting caught the smooth, flawless texture of her bare shoulders. "You always grind your teeth slightly when you are rapidly calculating your next strategic move," she noted softly. "I am simply evaluating the profound consequences of my new lease agreement," I countered, looking straight up into her eyes. "There is absolutely nothing left to evaluate," she stated with absolute, unwavering confidence. She slowly lowered her head, deliberately claiming my lips in a slow, exquisitely sweet morning kiss. She tasted wonderfully like warmth and undisturbed peace, completely devoid of our usual sharp hostility. I eagerly opened my mouth to her, sliding my hands up to tangle in her messy, beautiful dark hair. She kissed me until my breath became completely shallow, pulling back just enough to look at my flushed face. "You are going to be late for work if you keep looking at me like that," I warned her breathlessly. Chloe let out a dark, highly amused chuckle that completely sent a fresh wave of heat straight to my core. "I essentially own the entire creative department," she reminded me, her thumb stroking my cheek lazily. "I dictate the absolute schedule, and I decide exactly when the workday begins." "You are incredibly corrupt," I teased, running my index finger lightly along her sharp jawline. "I am highly motivated to protect my most valuable newly acquired asset," she corrected smoothly. She finally pushed the heavy white duvet off our tangled legs, the cool conditioned air hitting my warm skin. She stood up completely unashamed in the brilliantly lit room, offering me her hand. I took it willingly, letting her powerful grip pull me up from the soft mattress. We walked completely barefoot across the flawlessly polished marble floor together. She led me straight into her massive, brightly illuminated walk-in closet. The room was vast, lined completely with intensely bright LED strips that highlighted row upon row of designer clothing. It looked entirely like a high-end luxury boutique, immaculately organized by color and rigid structure. "Your entire wardrobe from your tiny apartment is completely unacceptable for my new partner," she announced clearly. "My wardrobe is perfectly professional," I argued weakly, though I knew I was hopelessly outmatched here. "Your wardrobe is designed to effortlessly blend in," she stated, turning to face me completely. "I require you to completely stand out, to make absolutely sure everyone knows whose team you are on. She stepped gracefully toward a brilliantly lit rack of pristine, tailored suits. She expertly pulled out a stunning, pure white silk blouse and a sharply tailored charcoal blazer. "Put this on," she commanded softly, holding the expensive garments out to me under the clear light. The intense lighting captured every tiny, delicate thread of the high-quality silk. I slowly took the clothes from her hands, the fabric feeling incredibly soft and cold against my fingertips. "Are you forcefully dressing me now, landlord?" I challenged, though I was already slipping the white blouse over my shoulders. "I am officially rebranding you," she replied, a highly triumphant smirk playing on her beautiful lips. She stepped entirely into my personal space, effortlessly pushing my trembling hands away from the tiny pearl buttons. "Allow me," she murmured, her dark eyes completely focused on the delicate task. She slowly buttoned the silk blouse, starting from the very bottom and working her way agonizingly slowly upward. Her knuckles brushed deliberately against the bare skin of my stomach, sending sharp electrical shocks through my body. The incredibly bright lighting made the intimate, domestic act feel intensely vulnerable and highly charged. She secured the final button just below my collarbone, her fingers lingering warmly against my rapid pulse. "Perfect," she breathed out softly, smoothing the crisp collar down with practiced precision. She stepped back slightly to evaluate her handiwork, nodding in absolute, deep satisfaction. I looked at my own reflection in the massive, brilliantly clear mirror covering the far wall. I looked entirely transformed, radiating a powerful, crisp authority that perfectly matched her own dominant aesthetic. I looked exactly like a woman who entirely belonged to the ruthless vice president of marketing. "Now, we require coffee," she decided briskly, instantly switching back into her highly efficient mode. We walked together into the massive, open-concept kitchen. The morning sunlight flooded the pure white quartz countertops, making the entire space look luminous and cinematic. I immediately walked toward the expensive espresso machine, fully ready to resume my assigned duties from yesterday. Chloe swiftly caught my wrist, stopping me completely in my tracks. "Sit down," she ordered gently, guiding me smoothly toward a tall, sleek white bar stool. "But the terms of my debt specifically stated I had to bring you coffee," I reminded her, slightly confused. "The terms of your debt are entirely dynamic and subject to my complete discretion," she countered flawlessly. She turned her back to me, expertly operating the complicated chrome machinery herself. I sat quietly under the bright, clear kitchen lights, completely mesmerized by the fluid grace of her movements. She was wearing a beautifully tailored dark navy suit today, the sharp lines emphasizing her athletic posture perfectly. She turned around a few moments later, placing a steaming white mug directly in front of me. The rich, dark aroma of expensive coffee beans instantly filled the bright, warm space. "I added a tiny splash of oat milk and exactly 1 pump of caramel," she stated casually. I stared up at her in absolute, complete astonishment. "How on earth do you know my exact, overly complicated coffee order?" I demanded softly. Chloe leaned across the brilliant white counter, resting her chin on her crossed arms. "I told you," she whispered, her dark eyes locking fiercely onto mine. "I have spent the last 5 years paying absolute, obsessive attention to every single thing you do." The terrifying depth of her long-standing fixation hit me like a massive, beautiful wave. She hadn't just suddenly decided to conquer me when she bought my apartment building. She had been meticulously, patiently waiting for the perfect opportunity to trap me forever. I picked up the warm mug, taking a slow, incredibly satisfying sip of the sweet liquid. "It is brewed absolutely perfectly," I admitted, a genuine smile breaking across my face. "Of course it is," she replied smoothly, straightening up to her full, intimidating height. "I absolutely never accept mediocrity in any of my investments." She grabbed her own travel mug and her expensive leather briefcase from the counter. "We need to leave immediately if we are going to flawlessly execute the new campaign strategy today," she announced. I stood up quickly, smoothing down the front of the tailored blazer she had chosen for me. "Are we arriving at the agency together?" I asked, a slight, sudden spike of nervous adrenaline hitting my system. We had spent half a decade strictly entering the building from opposite sides to avoid explosive arguments. Chloe paused at the heavy glass front door of the penthouse, turning to look directly at me. The incredibly bright morning light perfectly framed her silhouette, making her look absolutely invincible. "We are absolutely arriving together," she declared with fierce, uncompromising authority. "I completely intended to walk you directly through the main lobby, straight past every single executive." She reached out, her strong hand effortlessly capturing my trembling fingers. "You are no longer my bitter, exhausting rival," she stated, her thumb tracing the back of my hand. "You are my brilliant partner, my tenant, and my absolute priority." I squeezed her hand tightly in response, fully accepting the heavy, beautiful weight of her declaration. "Then I suppose we should go give the creative department a massive heart attack," I agreed confidently. Chloe smiled, a breathtaking, highly dangerous expression that promised absolute chaos. "I expect nothing less from my most lucrative acquisition," she murmured softly. She pulled me gently but firmly out of the brilliantly lit penthouse, completely ready to conquer our shared world. The brilliant morning sunlight reflected blindingly off the massive glass exterior of our corporate headquarters. We stepped out of the black vehicle together, immediately commanding the absolute attention of the bustling street. Chloe placed her warm hand firmly on the small of my back, a deeply territorial gesture entirely visible to the public. I wore the crisp white silk blouse and charcoal blazer she had personally selected for me in her luminous penthouse. The exceptionally bright, clear lighting of the main lobby completely eliminated any hiding places for our astonished colleagues. Dozens of junior executives and senior copywriters completely froze in their tracks as we walked through the revolving doors. They were entirely accustomed to seeing us enter the building from opposite sides, radiating bitter, exhausting hostility. Today, we moved in flawless, devastating synchronization, our shoulders brushing intimately with every confident step. The intense, pure white LED strips illuminating the ceiling captured every single detail of our unprecedented alliance. Chloe did not alter her famously intimidating expression, her sharp features set in a mask of absolute, icy authority. Yet, her long fingers remained securely anchored to the fabric of my tailored jacket, silently claiming me before the entire world. The long elevator ride up to the creative executive floor was suffocatingly quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the machinery. 3 rival project managers shared the enclosed, brightly lit space with us, their eyes darting nervously toward our touching arms. I leaned back slightly against the reflective chrome wall, allowing myself to subtly press closer against Chloe's side. She responded instantly, dropping her hand from my waist to firmly interlock her fingers with mine in the plain, bright light. A sharp, highly audible gasp echoed from one of the project managers, though neither of us bothered to acknowledge the sound. We stepped out onto the polished marble floor of the marketing department as an entirely unified, unstoppable front. The transparent, floor-to-ceiling glass walls of Chloe's massive corner office offered a completely unobstructed view of her domain. She guided me straight into the brightly illuminated sanctuary, elegantly shutting the heavy soundproof door behind us. The sudden silence was immediately shattered by the frantic, flashing red light of her high-priority executive secure phone. Chloe released my hand smoothly, her posture instantly shifting from a possessive lover back into a ruthless corporate commander. She tapped the glowing speaker icon, and the panicked voice of our chief executive filled the brilliantly clear, sunlit room. Our most critical client, a highly prestigious luxury automotive brand, was threatening to terminate their massive contract immediately. A rival agency had just maliciously leaked a suspiciously identical storyboard for their upcoming flagship commercial campaign. The 60-second narrative script we had painstakingly developed over months was now completely compromised and unusable. The client demanded an entirely new, flawless visual pitch by the end of the day, or they would permanently withdraw their entire account. The heavy, crushing weight of the sudden corporate disaster hung thickly in the bright, highly conditioned air. Chloe slowly disconnected the call, her dark, piercing eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "They want to destroy everything we have built," she stated softly, her voice dangerously calm and terrifyingly cold. This was exactly the kind of massive, high-stakes crisis we used to ruthlessly blame each other for in the past. We would have spent hours arguing in brightly lit boardrooms, desperately trying to shift the catastrophic professional blame. But standing in the center of her completely transparent office today, I felt absolutely no instinct to fight against her. "Then we simply build something vastly superior right now," I countered firmly, dropping my leather bag onto her pristine desk. A sudden, breathtakingly beautiful smile broke through the severe, icy tension on her sharp, flawless face. The brilliant, unshadowed lighting of the room highlighted the stunning, fierce gold flecks buried deep within her dark irises. "This is exactly why you are my most valuable, completely irreplaceable asset," she murmured, walking quickly toward the massive smartboard. She activated the bright, glowing screen, the harsh white light illuminating her tailored navy suit and crisp white collar. "We need a completely new aesthetic approach, a different emotional core for the entire 60-second visual sequence," she commanded smoothly. I walked over to stand directly beside her, the familiar, intoxicating scent of bergamot instantly clearing my racing, chaotic mind. The original concept relied heavily on aggressive speed and mechanical dominance, I analyzed quickly, grabbing a digital stylus. We pivot entirely away from that predictable trope, focusing instead on absolute, quiet elegance and undeniable control. Chloe watched me intently as I began rapidly sketching out the new structural narrative on the glowing white board. A driver navigating a breathtaking, highly complex mountain pass in the dead of night, she suggested, her mind working flawlessly in tandem with mine. "No," I corrected gently, stepping closer until our arms brushed lightly under the intense, clear office lights. We set it perfectly at the exact moment of a brilliant, completely clear sunrise, maximizing the cinematic, high-definition lighting. Chloe's eyes widened slightly, instantly recognizing the absolute brilliance of the newly proposed visual aesthetic. The transition from dark shadows into absolute, undeniable clarity, she translated smoothly, entirely matching my creative wavelength. We fell into an astonishingly rapid, deeply intense rhythm, our thoughts intertwining as seamlessly as our bodies had the previous night. She provided the sharp, analytical demographic targeting, effortlessly calculating the exact emotional triggers for our key audience. I translated her ruthless logic into beautiful, deeply evocative visual storyboards and compelling, highly polished narrative scripts. The rest of the creative department watched us closely through the completely transparent glass walls of the massive corner office. They witnessed their two most fiercely combative executives working together in absolute, terrifyingly perfect harmony. We moved around the brightly lit space like partners executing a highly complex, beautifully choreographed dance. When my hand cramped slightly from rapid typing, she silently placed a fresh, perfectly hot cup of coffee directly in front of me. When she needed a specific visual reference to finalize the luxury interior shots, I had it projected onto the screen before she even finished her sentence. The massive, crushing pressure of the looming deadline did not fracture our fragile new bond, it actively, forcefully forged it into solid steel. Hours vanished inside the brilliant, shadowless bubble of her executive office as we constructed the ultimate commercial masterpiece. I typed out the final, highly descriptive sentence of the 60-second narrative script, explicitly defining the luminous, cinematic conclusion. I stepped back from the glowing keyboard, my chest heaving slightly as the massive wave of lingering adrenaline began to recede. Chloe stood directly beside me, her dark, intense eyes rapidly scanning the finalized, flawlessly formatted document on the bright screen. The heavy, tense silence in the room stretched on for several long, agonizing seconds under the unrelenting overhead lights. She slowly turned her head to look at me, a look of profound, absolute awe completely softening her usually sharp features. "It is utterly flawless," she whispered, her voice carrying a deep, resonant reverence that sent a violent shiver down my spine. "It explicitly targets exactly what they want, untouchable luxury wrapped in brilliant, clear, undeniable power." I let out a long, shaky breath, leaning heavily against the solid edge of her pristine, polished mahogany desk. "We are going to completely obliterate the rival agency," I stated confidently, fully absorbing her fierce, validating energy. Chloe took a slow, highly deliberate step toward me, deliberately ignoring the dozens of curious eyes watching us from the outer floor. She reached out, her strong, warm hands firmly grasping the lapels of the crisp charcoal blazer she had chosen for me. The intense, clear lighting of the office captured the raw, unfiltered hunger that suddenly flared brightly in her dark eyes. "You saved my most critical corporate account today," she murmured, pulling me entirely into her personal space. "I am simply a highly dedicated tenant ensuring my landlord remains financially solvent," I replied, a teasing, breathless smile crossing my lips. You are so much more than a tenant, she corrected fiercely, her voice dropping into a low, incredibly intimate register. She did not care that the entire marketing department was openly staring through the completely transparent glass walls. She completely eliminated the remaining physical distance between us, capturing my lips in a deep, overwhelmingly passionate kiss. A collective, highly audible gasp rippled clearly through the outer office floor, entirely visible through the clear glass barrier. I did not pull away. Instead, I willingly surrendered completely to the intoxicating, heavy heat of her demanding mouth. My hands slid naturally up her arms, resting securely on the rigid, powerful shoulders of her tailored navy suit. She kissed me with the absolute, triumphant intensity of a woman who had just flawlessly conquered the entire world. She poured every ounce of her gratitude, her long-standing obsession, and her fiercely guarded vulnerability into the brilliant exchange. The extremely bright, clear lighting of the room washed over us, completely blessing our highly public, undeniable union. She finally pulled back very slightly, her breath ghosting warmly against my deeply flushed, highly sensitive skin. Her perfectly styled dark hair was slightly messy now, framing her striking face with a beautiful, chaotic elegance. The client is going to absolutely beg us to produce this exact campaign, she promised softly, resting her forehead heavily against mine. And exactly what will my specific bonus be for engineering this miraculous rescue? I challenged smoothly, gazing deeply into her mesmerizing eyes. Chloe chuckled softly, the deep, vibrating sound radiating wonderfully straight through the solid expanse of her chest. I believe we need to radically renegotiate the absolute terms of your ongoing debt repayment, she whispered seductively against my lips. I think you have officially earned the right to actively co-sign the primary lease on the entire penthouse. The sheer, breathtaking magnitude of her casual statement completely paralyzed all my remaining logical thoughts. She was effectively tearing up the twisted, highly coercive contract she had initially used to force me into her arms. She was offering me genuine, absolute equality, inviting me to stand permanently by her side as a true, undeniable partner. I accept those modified terms, I breathed out softly, a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute joy blooming rapidly in my chest. Chloe smiled beautifully, a radiant, unguarded expression that completely eclipsed the brilliant artificial lighting of the room. We turned smoothly together to face the glowing monitors, perfectly ready to dispatch our newly forged masterpiece to the waiting client. The bitter, deeply exhausting rivalry that had previously defined our entire existence was permanently, irrevocably dead. In its place stood an incredibly powerful, perfectly synchronized partnership that absolutely no one in the industry could ever touch. The massive city below us was entirely bathed in a spectacular, brilliant array of endless neon lights. We stood together inside the continuously rising glass elevator, returning to our absolute sanctuary. The incredibly bright overhead illumination inside the moving cabin perfectly highlighted her striking, flawless features. Chloe looked completely relaxed for the very first time since I had ever known her. Her tailored dark navy suit was slightly rumpled now, bearing the beautiful, undeniable physical evidence of our chaotic victory. She leaned heavily against the clear glass wall, her dark, piercing eyes completely locked onto my flushed face. I wore the crisp white silk blouse and charcoal blazer she had carefully chosen for me. The extremely bright lighting caught the slight, uncontrollable trembling of my hands as I clutched my leather bag. I was no longer trembling from professional anxiety or deeply rooted, exhausting hostility. I was trembling from the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the profound affection expanding rapidly within my chest. The polished chrome doors finally glided open, revealing the massive, breathtaking expanse of the pristine penthouse. She pressed the metallic panel on the smooth wall, instantly flooding the entire space with blindingly clear, pure white light. There were absolutely no dark corners, no hidden shadows, and no secrets left between us in this flawlessly illuminated room. The brilliant light reflected powerfully off the spotless white marble floors, creating a gorgeous, cinematic glow. Chloe did not walk directly toward the plush, inviting living room area to rest. She walked purposefully toward a sleek, transparent glass desk situated near the massive floor-to-ceiling window. I followed closely behind her, completely captivated by the fluid, athletic grace of her commanding movements. The familiar, intensely intoxicating scent of cold bergamot lingered beautifully in the heavily conditioned air. She opened a secure, completely transparent drawer and pulled out a thick, familiar stack of watermarked parchment. It was the exact same legal document she had tossed onto my cheap coffee table back in my tiny, dark apartment. It was the heavily binding lease agreement that had fundamentally, violently altered the entire trajectory of my life. She held the heavy papers perfectly still under the bright, uncompromising glare of the high-definition desk lamp. I stopped just a few inches away from her, my heart hammering fiercely against my ribs. "Are you planning to review the strict terms of my ongoing punishment?" I asked, my voice barely a soft, breathless whisper. Chloe turned her head slowly, the stunning gold flecks in her dark irises glowing brightly in the luminous room. Her pale skin looked incredibly smooth and absolutely radiant under the intense artificial lighting. "There is absolutely no punishment left to administer," she replied, her voice incredibly deep and wonderfully smooth. She gripped the thick stack of legal documents firmly with both of her strong, capable hands. With one highly deliberate, incredibly swift motion, she tore the entire legally binding contract completely in half. The sharp, incredibly distinct sound of tearing paper echoed loudly in the quiet, brightly lit space. I gasped softly, my eyes widening in absolute, genuine shock as she tore the heavy parchment a second time. She let the ruined pieces of paper flutter gracefully down onto the shiny, brilliantly polished white floor. They looked completely harmless now, entirely stripped of their former terrifying, life-altering power. "What exactly are you doing?" I breathed out, completely unable to tear my gaze away from her intensely focused face. "I am officially completely canceling your massive financial debt," she announced with absolute, stunning finality. She took a slow, confident step directly into my personal space, completely eliminating the remaining physical distance. "You no longer owe me any money, any forced compliance, or any mandatory professional obedience." The sheer gravity of her unbelievable words hung heavily in the brightly illuminated space between us. She was voluntarily surrendering the ultimate weapon she had so carefully acquired to keep me securely trapped. "But the entire building," I stammered weakly, entirely overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of her gesture. "I did not buy that heavily depreciated building for the real estate portfolio," she confessed, her dark eyes entirely completely bare. "I bought it solely to build an inescapable bridge directly to you." She reached gracefully into the inner pocket of her expensive navy blazer, retrieving a single, crisp piece of pristine paper. She handed it to me gently, her warm fingertips brushing wonderfully against my cold, trembling hands. I looked down at the brilliantly lit page, the perfectly typed letters completely clear and undeniable. It was a highly customized, heavily legally binding deed of absolute co-ownership for the entire luxury penthouse. My name was flawlessly printed right next to hers, permanently securing my equal place in her magnificent domain. "I do not want a severely restricted tenant anymore," she whispered, raising her hand to gently cup my flushed cheek. "I deeply, desperately want an absolute equal, a permanent partner in absolutely everything I do." The last lingering remnants of my fiercely guarded independence melted completely away under her warm, illuminating touch. I looked up from the incredibly bright paper, meeting her gaze with a fierce, burning intensity of my own. "You are a remarkably terrible landlord," I stated softly, a massive, brilliant smile finally breaking completely across my face. "I am completely aware of my professional shortcomings in that specific area," she agreed, her thumb stroking my cheekbone tenderly. "You forcefully evicted me from my home, absolutely ruined my corporate rivalry, and completely destroyed my lease. I am fully prepared to spend the rest of my entire life making adequate reparations," she countered smoothly, leaning dangerously closer. Her beautiful, perfectly painted lips hovered agonizingly close to mine, completely illuminated by the bright city glow behind her. I reached up quickly, grabbing the sharp lapels of her dark navy jacket with complete, unhesitating confidence. "Then I absolutely demand we commence the repayment immediately," I challenged her, pulling her completely down to my level. She let out a soft, highly breathless laugh just before our mouths collided in a perfect, explosive union. This was not a kiss born of heavy, oppressive debt or highly toxic corporate hostility. It was a pure, beautifully bright celebration of complete surrender and absolute, undeniable equality. Her strong arms wrapped instantly around my narrow waist, pulling me completely flush against her athletic frame. I tangled my fingers deeply into the soft, dark waves of her hair, holding her securely in the brilliant, shadowless light. The incredibly bright, clear lights of the pure white penthouse bore silent, stunning witness to our final, unbreakable contract. The exhausting, heavily combative war was definitively, permanently over. And in the brilliantly illuminated aftermath, we had both gloriously, completely won. The blinding morning sun washed completely over the massive white penthouse. There were absolutely no shadows left anywhere in our beautifully shared sanctuary. Every polished marble surface gleamed with a pristine, intensely cinematic clarity. I stood perfectly still in front of the brilliantly clear, floor-to-ceiling glass window. The sprawling, illuminated metropolis below us completely belonged to our newly formed empire. Chloe walked softly up behind me, her athletic presence instantly altering the highly charged atmosphere. She was wearing a stunningly tailored, sharp white suit that perfectly matched the radiant environment. She wrapped her strong arms securely around my narrow waist with undeniable, familiar authority. The deeply intoxicating scent of cold bergamot instantly enveloped all of my racing senses. She rested her chin gently on my shoulder, her warm breath ghosting over my highly sensitive neck. "You are staring intently at our conquered territory again," she murmured in a low, husky voice. I leaned back heavily against her solid, incredibly comforting warmth. "I am simply evaluating the massive scope of our latest, highly aggressive joint venture," I replied smoothly. She chuckled softly, the deep, resonant sound vibrating wonderfully straight against my spine. Her long fingers slid gracefully down my bare arm to firmly capture my left hand. The exceptionally bright overhead light caught the heavy, flawless diamond resting perfectly on my ring finger. It completely matched the equally stunning, brilliant band resting permanently on hers. The ruthless corporate queen had officially bound me to her in every single conceivable way. "The senior board members are still completely terrified of our unified front," she noted with deep, predatory satisfaction. "We systematically dismantled 3 massive rival agencies in a single fiscal quarter," I reminded her playfully. "We are an incredibly dangerous, completely unstoppable combination when we are no longer fighting each other." Chloe turned me around slowly, her dark, mesmerizing eyes completely wide and filled with raw, unfiltered adoration. The intense, pure white lighting illuminated every single perfect, sharp line of her beautiful face. She looked at me with the exact same fierce, overwhelming possessiveness she had shown on our very first day. Only now, there was absolutely no hostility, no heavy corporate armor, and no bitter deception left between us. She was completely, undeniably mine, just as I was permanently and irreversibly hers. "Do you ever genuinely miss the chaotic adrenaline of our bitter, exhausting war?" she asked softly, her intense gaze dropping deliberately to my lips. She reached up effortlessly, her thumb delicately tracing the soft, flushed curve of my warm cheek. "Not for a single, fleeting second," I answered with absolute, unwavering, and beautiful certainty. "I vastly prefer the highly specific, deeply romantic terms of our current, permanent arrangement." I slid my hands up confidently to grasp the crisp lapels of her expensive custom blazer. I pulled her down gracefully, completely closing the tiny, agonizingly remaining distance between our parted lips. She kissed me deeply, fiercely, and with an endless, completely consuming hunger. It was a breathtaking, heavy kiss that boldly promised an entire lifetime of brilliant, unshadowed devotion. Her hands tightened possessively on my waist, lifting me slightly off the pristine marble floor. I tangled my fingers eagerly into the beautiful, dark waves of her perfectly styled hair. We had started this terrifying journey as bitter, resentful enemies trapped inside a dark, tiny apartment. We had evolved flawlessly into an invincible force standing together in the brightest, clearest room in the entire sky. The highly coercive, fabricated debt that initially brought us together had been permanently erased from existence. In its beautiful place, we had actively built an incredibly strong, inescapable sanctuary of pure, absolute love. I looked deeply into her radiant, gold-flecked eyes under the absolute clarity of the morning sun. I fully intended to remain her captivated, entirely willing tenant for the rest of eternity.